It is data that pushes my narcissistic tendencies aside. It is data that cannot be adequately described, that is making me as I confront my own complicity in the wounding discourses named by my participants and that wound me back. If I afford this vibrant data its rightful place and knock consciousness and experience off its humanist pedestal, then not just data, but research, knowledge, and analysis, and multiple other signifiers that we've mentioned this week, become something else. The enactments occur when Fran and Tamala and I are made together in the moment of our tellings that force us to recognize that everything happens at the surface. That, like Alice, we are growing bigger and smaller all at once in a mutually and emergent becoming with our data, with each other, with our memories that can only be thought of in the present moment in which we are now made and unmade. As Judith Butler wrote, and I quote, "In speaking the I undergo something of what cannot be captured or assimilated by the I, since I always arrive too late to myself," end quote. Our experiences, those of our participants, and our feeble attempts at capture are not immune and cannot be remedied. It is this late arrival, this enactment, this becoming between the two of data and our researcher selves, that enables me to continue to be made and unmade in posthuman enactments of vibrant data. Thank you. Fortunately for you, or unfortunately for me, we have ample time for questions.
Well, we'll see which it is.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was fabulous, Lisa. And again, you've written my paper for me tomorrow, so I have no paper left. Questions for Lisa? Comments?
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered, I said this is when you try my stuff, is you put that across how I felt affected for a long time about my head. And then as researchers, we might feel quite disordered in our relations, or trouble, these might be troubles in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
that we have feelings
Mm-hmm.
you've given to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we are eating them. We're eating. Oh, the question. Okay, so Sarah was saying, she was just commenting on, particularly in relation to her work with, I think it's with young women that have supposed eating disorders. This idea of consuming and being consumed takes on a different material effect with her data. But how this does, I think, change the way we think about our relationship with data. And I still think about a paper that Betty wrote some time ago about the fact that if we're not always in crisis as qualitative researchers, then something is wrong because we're not being pushed, or we're not on the edge of thinking about what might happen, or we're just staying in safe territory. And so this is not safe territory for me right now. But it's that I don't know, eating. We're always eating, and I was reading. Maybe thanks to Maggie or you started reading The Logic of Sense, and then reading James Williams, and so then that all sort of feeds this. And it's the fact that it can't let me go. The thing about reading from the novel that even, and I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but even when we're not doing our research, we are. And we're regurgitating it. We're vomiting it, to use Jessica's metaphor. And then eating it again, so to be really gross. Sorry, it's true. We put it out there and then we take it back in. Okay, next question. If anyone needs to leave suddenly, I will understand.
Well, that whole notion just, it troubles what we've all been talking about this week is, do we still have a method? I mean, do we need to call it qualitative anymore? If we are working on a project and we can go to YouTube and get, quote, data to use to compel us or to puncture us. And so it really is this idea of vibrant data is not simply what we collect, but it's everything that is everywhere all the time. longer can categorize where it is or what it is or even how we're supposed to use it. We can't have method like that anymore. It would really open up the idea of entanglement and
or how we're supposed to respond. I mean, and in Bennett's book, she does these, you know, the illustrations of these things that are the detritus that's on the sidewalk, and who's to say what we should attend to and what we shouldn't attend to, and how it's going to be assembled in a way that makes sense or doesn't make sense.
Could I just come in on that
Sure.
conversation? Yeah, because some of what you were saying about how data has agency, and it's, you know, we can feel that when it moves in us, which is, and you were saying that. But it also made me think of what Hillary was saying this morning when she was, I think, critiquing the renewed materialist work for feeling that the world was there for us. And I'm wondering, I don't know how you do it, but maybe we ought to look at the data that ignores us, or I don't know.
Yeah, well,
It was just a thought.
or the data that ignores us, or maybe that's sort of kind of circling back to my work on silence. It's that which we have previously ignored and discounted as not having any, as not communicating anything, and then opening up. I mean, this gets back to Betty's transgressive data, which has been talked about much this week. But it's that which we have not counted because of the restrictive nature of the use of the term. And I'm not ready to give up on data or the word data, but I think it is pushing us into those different places. Jennifer. Oh, sorry, and then I'm not supposed to be letting you call on people. I'll let you call on people. Jennifer.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fantastic. It just seems to me that maybe there's sometimes a fine line between inserting oneself as a reflexive insertion into the text and inserting oneself and trying to insert oneself as entangled with all sorts of matter. And I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts that you'd like to share about how one might guard against inserting oneself as a reflexive researcher if what you're actually wanting to do is insert yourself as an entangled researcher.
I think I actually do a better job of explaining that in a paper that's in this special issue, the QSE special issue. And in that paper I talk about a voice without organs, and I'm really trying to push this idea of the voice as not being attached to an individual subject. And even when it's my participant voice or it's my voice, going back to Fran, it's about small towns. It's not a small town or her small town or my small town. But it's that, and that's what I was trying to gesture to in terms of talking about, you know, the dean becomes a symbol. It's not this dean or that president, but it's these, it's the way that this voice is produced by this entangled body without organs, maybe to these folks. I don't know if that's helpful. Okay.
Harry.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation so far makes me think about some other things that I've been trying to make sense of this week. And I mean, one of the things that comes across to me about new materialism is that it's actually quite human, at least in some guises. You know, the sort of the viscerality of hope and fear and sort of the biological processes that are going on there. So I'm wondering about what's the relationship between that sort of human-based new materialism, what you've described as post-humanism, post-human, and the non-human, which has also come into the conversation.
Well, I mean,
is post-human the same as non-human?
Well, no, I don't think it is. That's a good question. As I understand it, and anyone else, feel free to jump in. I mean, I'm human. This table is non-human. And there is, in Barad's words, an interaction. I am positioned, and there's a different relationship there's a different, well, anyway, so I'm human, this is non-human, but the post-human is saying that agency is not centered in the individual, that agency is mutually constituted between the human and the non-human, between the material and the discursive. So in terms of, that's how I understand the distinction between those three things that you've identified. But going back, and the reason I kind of belabored the agency point at the beginning is that that in traditional research practices and in humanist orientation, agency, the human is the site of agency, and the human is making choices of which he or she is fully aware. And that when we move to the post-human, yes, I'm making choices. I'm making these agential cuts that have been discussed a couple times, some of which are intentional, but then the non-human, the material, is also producing cuts. So it's not just that we are in control of everything. Do you want to add anything to that?
The intention emerges as an effect in the relationship between you and the material. So I mean, intention even is distributed, and so this is kind of the difficulty with this, that we're operating somewhere in betweenish, which makes it, what is produced is more interesting than what is.
Yeah.
So.
And I also think it's important, I think, to also say that at least how I'm approaching this theory and this work is that it's not an attribution of, it's not an anthropomorphizing of the non-human, but it's giving the material its due in this as an agent, as an actant.
Stephanie, I think, and then Sarah again. Oh, and some Elsa as well. Stephanie?
Just to pick up on that conversation and just think about it, even in a more relational point of view, so what I see happening is that Lisa's behind the table in front of the room, but this is also in relationship to the fact that we're on the other side of the table. So it's also not just about like where you are with the table, it's also where we are. And then it's like what all it gets brought through who we are, where the place is. It's all those things that get brought together that then produce like the agency, relational, ontological.
Yeah, I mean, in the broad chapter, Alicia and we do quite an extensive analysis of two of our participants, Sarah and the suit, and how she's produced very differently, and how the suit produces her, and there's this discussion about her and the table and the suit. And then Cassandra, who is, and we talk about the office, and how the office then also produces this different response on the part of students. And so I don't have time to go into all that there, but that is another example like that.
Nice point. Should we have Elsa first because Sarah's got to go? Yeah.
So I've been carrying around a question. I mentioned this to you last night, Lisa, that I've been carrying around a question since hearing Lisa's talk at AERA in the spring. So bear with me because it's had a lot of time to generate. But I was thinking specifically about the punctum. And this is where the question came from. But then I'm really excited to hear you use this term consumption. So I'm sure 3 months later I'll have another question. Anyway, I was thinking about the punctum in relation to Louise Erdrich's book, The Roundhouse, which is an absolutely beautiful novel that talks wonderfully about these complex interrelations, and she's speaking specifically about reservation politics and the law and how it enacts in bodies, how it comes up against federal law in the United States, and women in those positions who are, and sexual violence against women on reservations, how that interacts with past, future, present. So that it gets more complex. But one of the things I wanted to ask in the punctum, I think this is a question of political and where the political fits in, is how do you count for the way that the punctum puncture the body more powerfully? Because what she talks about is the distributed effects of the violence of a mother being raped on a reservation. But that act of violence happened to that woman. And so I would love to hear you kind of wrangle with that, because that's what I've been wrangling with in my mind.
So is your question, am I sidestepping the physical violence that occurs to women? I mean, that's kind of the short, I'm just...
It's not sidestepping, it's accounting for the idea, and this is something, so the other connection is Christoph Wojcicki, who's a really wonderful artist, and he uses projections on buildings to talk about buildings and skins, and saying those skins protect us from saying, I can never look at you, I can be in front of the powerful violence has happened, but I can never understand what you're going through. So that's what it is.
Well, and I guess part of this work is saying, I'm not going to claim to understand what anyone has gone through. And so part of this that I think in some ways is perhaps a more ethical response is, and this kind of goes back to some of Alicia and mine's earlier work, is to not to assume that this voice that is speaking this truth can be captured and contained and made, and that we can make meaning of it. I mean, we can create knowledge from it, but that we can say that we can understand. But I think also part of what happens in this move is that yes, there are physical forces that produce violence, that does violence to the body. But I think also what I'm trying to say is that and this is where I think Maggie goes, particularly in this article in QSC, that language also produces material effects. And again, in our discussion in the broad chapter, we do this thing with some of the students saying things to Cassandra that were said by another faculty member, and how that also bruises the body and does real physical harm to the body. So part of this is trying to collapse these binaries and to say that when we're talking about violence and material effects and even language as material, that it's Vicky Kirby's work, nature culture, that we have created these categories, and so now what happens when we try to collapse them and do more complicated types of analyses? So hopefully that at least begins to help you think about that. Thanks.
Sarah,
What I would say collapsing, I was just thinking the way in which.
can you talk a little louder, or we'll translate for you afterwards. Don't worry. No, it's okay.
Just the way in which what we're talking about here, this particular engagement with data translation, what we're talking about in terms of agency, something which is an own finding, the way in which that I think usefully rubs up against notions of responsibility, responsibilitisation, as Rose engaged with it, and how kind of capital ideas kind of position individuals as responsible for the things that happen to them that can often be bad. Just thinking of the productive ways in which they kind of might be used to the difference of those coming against them, might be used to engage with like the material effects of violence in ways which don't make research feel as though it's monstrous when we engage with these areas.
Yeah, and in fact, there are a lot of people who are, instead of talking about the material turn or material feminism, are talking about they're talking about the ontological term, but then there are others who are calling it the ethical term, because it's a recognition that even the way we frame and engage in our research then produces these ontological, these different ontologies and these different becomings and these different real effects. So a lot more that we can talk about. Somebody had her hand up and then there's a hand over here.
Betty?
I think my question, the question I came to the conference with is, where is power in the new empiricisms? Having read too much Foucault, that question is always there. What does power look like? Is it there? Is this a different kind of power? Foucault gave us a different interpretation of power, that power is always circulating, moving. I can kind of overlay that on a flattened ontology. On the other hand, I think some of these questions are really important. How do we think of power and the effects of power in a new ontology?
Yeah, and I think I can say, I haven't thought about power per se, except in this data with Tamala. It's looking at how these relations are produced. Again, these entangled relations are produced, and what effects. Yeah, so that might be interesting. Pardon?
I would just say it's still distributed.
Yeah, it is
We just have to
distributed.
figure out
It will
how
get
the
stuck.
it-
Yeah.
yeah,
It will
yeah.
always get stuck.
So where are
I
those?
think.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could come in on that
Yeah,
too,
please.
because that is the question, to which I have no answer. But I know that some people are trying to engage it. People like, from a kind of new materialist or new empiricist point of view, people like John Protevi and Brian Masumi, and I think their arguments are very complex, and I don't think they have sorted them all out yet, but they would be trying to understand how the huge kind of concrescences of power, the institutions of the Foucauldian sense, emerge out of a much more multiplicitous flatness than, you know, Foucault or Marx or any other can really explain, because those always think of power as emerging through encounters with already constituted subjects, things and people. So I guess a materialist view of power would have to see all sorts of, in Deleuze's sense, it would be series of things coming together. So Protevi's got, in his book, he looks at Hurricane Katrina, and rather than taking that kind of Deleuzean kind of good sense, common sense view that sees it simply as, you know, negligence by the federal government or poor organisation, by, you know, that he tries to understand it in terms of flows and things coming together like a perfect storm. I mean, personally, I don't think he does it very well, because he and we are still at the point of understanding how things flowed together to produce something that's already happened. And the real challenge, in the Deleuzean sense, is to get the diagram, which will actually enable us to get a glimpse of what might be coming next and intervene to just, you know, turn it around slightly.
Well, and in the improvisation, when Jeff or one of the musicians was talking last night, when you're improvising, you're not playing in the present, you're playing like in the near future, because you're anticipating, and so that's what you're describing.
Okay, well, I think Lisa's paid the price, but we've gained the benefits of finishing early, actually. So thank you, Lisa.